was a rumble in the jungle. Once I heard Dad was outside again counting birds, and Mama plugged in a nightlight, and I saw the queen of the world.
Welcome to the Golden Hour Birth Podcast. I am your co-host Liz.
And I'm your co-host Natalie. And tonight we have Traveling with Babies sensation Kelly Farrell Stary on. I'm going to give a wink to Andrea Klipsch, our mutual friend, our Aussie girl.
Yeah, girl.
And Kelly is going to tell her stories of her two children. So, Kelly, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Such an honor.
So if you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about your family.
Yes. My
And
favorite
we'll
story. I feel like, cause it's just like, I don't know, sometimes it's like so crazy even to me. So in 2016, I lost my job, and in the most extreme reaction to losing your job ever, I was like, move to Europe. Like, I'm just going to move to Europe.
Yes.
And so that's what I did. Didn't know anyone, didn't have a job, didn't have an apartment, like just packed my bags. Was planning on teaching English because I was already a teacher here, in St. Louis. And I was like, I'll just do that. And I'll just do that there.
Yeah.
And, showed up one day and was like, well, I'm going to give myself 3 months to figure it out. If I don't figure it out in 3 months, I'll just move home.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured it out, and I was there for 4 years. And funnily enough, I met my now husband like a month after moving there.
Wow.
And we met on Tinder, and there it was used more like, I know it's like Tinder, but at the time in Europe, it was not as much of like a hookup app, I felt like, as it was like here in the States, but more of just like, people are moving, people are traveling, people are going around. Like, it's a lot more casual to just be like, hey, do you want to like, what is there to do here? What is fun in the evenings?
Mm-hmm.
And so we just kind of messaged, and he was Czech. So I was like, you know, the language. Like, that is super important because I know nothing. Cause I would just showed up in Prague one day and tried my best, and then was like, I don't know if I'll ever learn this language.
Wow.
It was impossible. So I was like, well, that's beneficial. Definitely want to make a Czech friend. And he asked me to go ice skating, and instead of going to a bar like everybody else. And so I was like, yeah,
That's really
let's
sweet.
do that. Let's go ice skating. And from there, we just kind of, of course, I was like, I just moved halfway across the world. I do not need to date you right now, but I do really like you. So let's continue to hang out and be friends. And then after like 2 months together, he was like, well, do you want to go to Italy? And I was like, how do you say no to like 2 months of, which is probably like, we were joking the other night. I was like, I can't believe I did that. I knew you for 2 months, and I was like, yes, let's go to Italy together. Just us two. You could have kidnapped me and murdered me. Thank goodness you did not do that. Like, I must have really had full trust in him in that moment. But like, after
you trusted your whole life in that moment.
I did. I was just like, my gut cannot lead me wrong. Like, it absolutely could. But like, at the time, I was like young and carefree and just going on a whim, just living life in the breeze. Funny how now I'm like, I can't even like go outside without being like, do I have everything? Do we have all the bags? Have I packed enough snacks? You know, like, but at the time it was just so easy with him. And so we just started dating, and and obviously 2020 was, I think, a rock thrown in, the bridge for everybody, and kind of shook things up. We had actually gotten married at the end of 2019, planning on moving because like we were living in Europe, we were traveling, we were, like living such a Renaissance life, and it was fantastic. And we were like, well, let's go to North America and South America and let's travel that part of the world for a little bit. And so we got married. We're already engaged, so we just did a little courthouse wedding. Then we were like, okay, well, perfect. Now we can just apply for a visa in the US, and that will at least we'll move there, and that can be our base for a little while, and we can travel that part of the globe. And then 2020 just shook everything up, and we're like, okay, well, we don't really know when the visa is going to get approved, but now we're really like, we are fresh newlyweds and we are just now not allowed to leave our home. And in Europe, it was like even more extreme. Like we really couldn't leave our apartment. The only thing you could leave your house for was to go to the doctor or to go to the grocery store or to walk the dog. Like everything else was completely shut down. You could not leave. And so we were really in our little tiny European apartment, Prague apartment, like just making it work. And after all of that, I like loved him even more. And just like we got along better and we just had such a nice time together during that experience. And so I was like, okay, well, if we can survive in this tiny apartment, let's plan on like doing van life, you know, because like if we move back to the US, that still allows us to travel, but we can go wherever we want. And it's a small confined space. We're used to that now. That would just be such a fun experience. And then his visa got approved. So we started that process. We were starting to look at vans. We were starting to look at like renovating. We were going to do like van life, you know, like renovate the van and live out of it with our dog and travel around. Like we were going to be those people.
Yeah.
1 month before we moved, I found out I was pregnant. 1 month.
Wow.
I had 4 weeks for us to be like, well, not gonna raise a baby in a van, but not to like knock on people that some people still do that. But I was like, just was not in the cards for me. I did not wasn't even entirely sure I wanted to be a mom. I felt still in my very like selfish phase. How am I going to, I loved to travel. How would I do that with kids?
Yeah.
You know, like how that just was so out of the realm for me. So to find out I was pregnant, then it was like, well, this is our reality. I now have 4 weeks to figure out. We were like, well, I guess we'll move back to St. Louis. I guess we will, you know, like move closer to my family and so we'll have the baby there and experience. Because another thing to think about was like, I was in this foreign country where I don't speak the language. And although they have incredible healthcare systems there and maternity leave and all of that stuff is really, really great. But finding a doctor that can communicate with me, it was like the ultimate priority. And I hadn't found that yet there. And so I just felt a lot more comfortable like moving back here to, even though it was going to be like astronomically more expensive, just going ahead with our plans to continue the move back. We had already paid all the money for the visa and gone through the whole wait process. And it had taken us like a year at this point from when we applied. And so much had happened in that. 2020 was a year.
Yeah.
And so we were like, let's just continue and we'll just go and we'll just do it. So I think I guess at that point I was like maybe 3 months pregnant. We sold everything that was in our apartment back in Prague and moved back to the States with 3 suitcases and our dog. 3 suitcases and our dog.
Gosh.
And just showed up and then had to start a life over here because I had been in Europe for 4 years and so much had changed, not just like in the world and in my environment, but like in me. And I was coming back a completely new person. I was coming back with this person that I was in love with, and I was coming back as a soon-to-be mom.
Mm-hmm.
And so like all the things, all the shifts, it was like all happening at one time, and it was just very overwhelming, and it was just really kind of culminating into this moment of like giving birth to my first daughter. And like, wow.
How did he do on the transition?
Oh, great. Because we had just gone from a place that was like very restrictive, everything shut down, very like, you can't do this, you can't go there, you can't, like, there's just not a ton of options. And then coming here, like, there were no rules and nobody was doing anything to
You don't want to wear a mask? That's okay.
So we came here, we're like, well, in part, it's kind of nice because we've been so restricted for the last, like, however many months, but also terrifying because I was pregnant. And this was still when nobody knew anything about this, before the vaccine. This was before anybody really knew the results of like, if you got COVID while you're pregnant. And like now they know it's really not good. But at the time there was no information. So it was like, I wasn't willing to risk it.
Yeah.
Like we did that move, which was actually nice because there was nobody on the plane. Like nobody was really flying at that time. But that in itself was a logistical nightmare because Germany wasn't letting anyone in the country. Like you could not, we were planning on flying out of Germany because there's an easier flight. And nobody could get in or out. So we had to hire a car to drive us overnight because you could still fly out of the airport, but you weren't allowed to like, we had an early morning flight and you weren't allowed to like stay in a hotel the night before. Like you literally just had to show up and fly out. And so we just hired a car to drive us the 5 hours from Prague to Frankfurt.
Oh my gosh.
Overnight. So we could just get there before the flight and then, and be gone. And so it was just, there were so many different things like that. So then to come here to the US, like my husband Jakob was just like, wow, there's just really nobody cares. Like there's no rules here. We can go wherever we want. Really? Like we can just do whatever. I'm like, America, man. Just do whatever. Freedom.
Land of the free.
Land of the free. Ridiculous.
That's
I mean,
hilarious.
like, that's just, and so now, like, he loves playing, like, he's huge into fantasy football, and, like, he was a pescatarian, so he didn't eat meat when we lived in Europe, loves barbecue now, like, full meathead, like, which is, I find is hilarious. Like, that's probably the biggest thing for me. I'm like, we lived 4 years in Europe and we really rarely ate meat. And now it's like, he was like, I can't move to St. Louis. I can't move to the Midwest and not eat barbecue. I'm like, that's fair. Like, I understand that. Like, wears a backwards baseball cap all the time. Like, sweatpants are life. Like,
What a cool guy.
what a cool guy. Such an American bro now, which, if you knew him before, makes it eternally better. So then we, I guess, like, just kind of went through the pregnancy. Everything was normal to the extent that, like, what do you know about, what do you really truly know until you go through it, right?
Yeah.
Like, I felt like there was no amount of research or like reading books or looking on Instagram to like find the information. Like I felt like I was taking it all in and was really trying to like absorb and learn. But like looking back, there was nothing that could have prepared me for like the birthing experience that I went through. And to some extent, like, maybe I didn't need any of that, but like maybe it did help me. You know, it just like each individual birth is so like special in their own way.
Yes.
And you just learn so much, but I just don't know if there's anything that can ever truly prepare you for going through that experience.
No, I'm just so ready to hear it all because we kind of started talking about it.
I know we did. So, yeah. So should I just like jump in? Just,
I mean, unless you feel like you want to add anything more from your pregnancy with Stella.
I don't know. It was pretty uneventful because it was COVID. We I just sat on my couch and like had crazy cravings of like sweet. Like I wanted Dunkin' Donuts every single day and like Diet Dr. Pepper. Like I was not I'm going to be honest, like to all the audience members out there, I was not that healthy queen.
No.
I wanted, which is hilarious because like I was never a sweet tooth. I never like really liked desserts or like I would rather have an entirely another bowl of pasta than like leave room for dessert, you know, like I wasn't that person. And so then to have these strong, crazy sugar cravings during pregnancy, like, wow. And then immediately gone afterwards. Like I haven't really had them since. And so that was like probably the craziest thing that, you know, like happened to me during the pregnancy portion because it was pretty, you know, laying on a couch and watching a lot of TV and reading a lot of books. And I was working up until till the beginning of May. So I had my daughter Stella at the end, May 29th. But the beginning of May, I worked up until then. And then I went to the doctor at what I was kind of telling you earlier. I went to the doctor at 36 weeks and got a cervical check. And I don't know what happened, but that like I started having contractions and I started bleeding and I started having like my heart rate was kind of going all crazy. And I had an absolute full blown meltdown in the doctor's office after this happened. And it wasn't my doctor. It was like the nurse in the office that did it. And I don't know if she was just like rough or I don't know what, I'm not 100% sure what stripping the membranes is, but that is, I know, a tool that they try to induce labor. Yeah. And that is like what I was thinking maybe she had done. Like, I don't know if it was on accident or on purpose but it was terrifying. I had like, this was during COVID, so I was by myself. My husband wasn't there with me. And so this was just like a routine appointment that I all of a sudden start going into labor and I'm having really strong contractions. Like immediately after. Holy cow. And it was so scary. So they put me on the like stress NST, like stress stuff and like drink some water, try to calm down because I'm like bawling. I'm like, I am not mentally prepared to have this baby right now. Like, what is happening? And my husband's not here. Like, I don't know what's going on. And so I finally calmed down. My contractions stop. And they are like, okay, we think you can go home. We're going to call you tomorrow. Like, and then we really, at that point, we were like, okay, let's really go over like, here's what happens. If you're in labor, here's the signs to look for. Count this many times, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And nothing happened. Mm-hmm. The next appointment, a week later, I was like, nobody's touching me. Nobody's going anywhere near me. And we are not doing this again. Yeah. I will take this to the very end without anybody ever touching me. Mm-hmm. 1 week later, even with that whole experience, they were like, we really would like to check you because I was having some contractions at that point. And I was actually, so when she did it the first time, when all of that stuff happened, I was like 2 or 3 centimeters dilated. And so 2 weeks later, then they were like, we want to check you again. We want to see if you've moved along any further. And I hadn't.
Mm.
And so they checked me and it was horrible. And my doctor, I like wouldn't let the nurse go near me. So my doctor did at that time because she was there. And she said I was like jumping to the other end of the table because I was just like, because then at that point I was like stressed out. I was tense. Like it was an experience that nobody, you know, they're not comfortable. But after that, I was like, my second pregnancy, spoiler alert, got pregnant again eventually. But I never got one. I was like, no, nobody's touching me.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that she did it again and I hadn't moved at all. 1 week before my scheduled induction, because I was like ready to have this baby out of me. My mom fell and had an accident and ended up having to be rushed in an ambulance to the hospital. And I am my mom's only kid. And I think like the stress of that just sent everything backwards. Like I became less like pregnant. Or like I was like I was maybe ready to have the baby earlier than or on my due date. But after that, the stress of like watching my mom have her accident and it left her paralyzed she had to have immediate surgery in order to fix it was like super dramatic. So to go through that, I think my body was just like, we're not going to do this now because you can't handle that in addition to this.
Yeah.
And so, but I was, of course, still ready to have this baby because I was like, I'm going to take care of you for a week.
Yeah.
And then I need to have my own time because I need to get into that headspace and I need to be ready to have this child. Like, I'm about to become a mom for the first time. Like, I just need to get there mentally.
Mm-hmm.
And by that point, things had like mellowed out. My mom had her surgery. She was starting to get some movement back in her hands and her legs. And so it seemed like the surgery was successful. And I was like, okay, I can allow for myself to have this space. But I think the stress of all of that just like made my daughter just like, she just was not ready to come out. She was like, I'm going to cook and toast a little bit longer in here. And the induction went routinely. I was supposed to go in a few days before, but there were so many women spontaneously going into birth because there was like a weird weather. It was like a big storm and the pressure from the like air pressure sent women and so many women into labor.
Amazing.
That they were like, well, we can't have you like, if you're not in labor, even though you have a scheduled induction, we have to wait. And I was like, darn. So like, how do you be like, the weather?
That's wild.
Yeah.
That.
Right? Well, that's what they told me. I don't know if that's like a real thing, but that's definitely what they told me.
Yeah.
And so then a couple days, and that, of course, like I had just been through all the stuff with my mom and I was just ready. And so that sent me into another spiral. And I was like crying on the phone with the lady at the hospital, like, please just let me come. I just want to get this over with. And I think that, like, looking back now, it's funny how, like, everything in hindsight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was just a ball of stress. Like, there was no way my birth with Stella was going to go smoothly, was going to be nice, was going to be as planned. They ended up calling me at like 8 a.m. while I was, well, it's funny because the night before they were like, oh no, definitely won't be anytime soon. And then the next morning I was like, well, let's go to First Watch. Let's get breakfast. Like, let's just have a nice, relaxing morning. And they called me while I was like waiting for my food and they were like, you can come in. And I was like, right? Nailed it. And so I was like, okay. So I if I couldn't eat because I was so anxious and, you know, like I was like, okay, let's just go. Let's just get the food to go. And because I'm not going to eat. And of course, my husband was like, okay, yeah, me either. All right, sure. And so we took the dog to the doggy hotel. We obviously we told them, we were like, this is what's happening. And they were like, we'll save space for you, make sure. And took our dog in and then went to the hospital for an induction. And that was I got there around 9, started the induction.
This was the 28th?
This was on the 28th, yes. And so they knew it would probably happen the next day, just with how that process goes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long process. And so the induction happened and things, when I went in, they checked me and I was 4 centimeters dilated when I went in. And after, that was 9 a.m., after several hours, they were like, okay, well, let's break your water. And so they broke my water. They did the epidural before things got really painful and just kind of wanted to wait and see. And the epidural went routine. It was perfectly fine. I stopped feeling things shortly thereafter. And then I would say about 4 to 5 hours in, I started feeling everything again. And I was like, is that normal? Should I be feeling pain and contractions and all this stuff? And they were like, no. I was like, well, I do. So what's that? What's happening there? And they were like, well, okay, let's call the anesthesiologist. They'll come back. They'll have a look at it. And they came back and they looked at it and they said, well, it's in the right place. So it should be working. Okay. Sounds good, I guess. And then I started progressing. This was probably around 10 p.m. I started progressing and really started, I guess I was probably around 8 or 9 centimeters, and they kept checking me and kept checking me. There would be one nurse in and she was like, nope, you're not ready. And I'm in massive amounts of pain at this point. And I'm like, are you sure? I really I'm ow. And I'm like, why? I thought an epidural, everybody says that you don't feel things when you get an epidural. Nobody tells you that well, sometimes they can slide off and you might still feel things, or maybe only half your body will feel it and then the other half will. And I don't know, there's just so many things that nobody ever talks about. But mine fully did not work. And the doctor, they kept coming back in and saying it's in the right spot. I don't know what's happening. And so they just kept dosing me with lidocaine, because that was the only thing that would, but apparently lidocaine is only meant to be used at the very end, ring of fire, total pain, as just a dose to get you, just get you through. Well, I had gotten about 7 or 8 doses of this, but throughout that ending portion.
Where were they putting it?
They were putting it in my epidural.
Oh.
And so they were like, well, it must work. It must be just you just don't have the right. Okay. Well, every anesthesiologist I've talked to after this has been like, that's not a thing. It's not, it doesn't just not work. They should have moved it. They should have tried other things. And because I'm crying constantly, I'm in so much pain. Essentially what happened is I'm pushing and pushing because, well, let's back up. I'm all over the place now, but if we back up a little bit, they kept checking me because they couldn't tell if I was 10 centimeters or not. And they didn't want me to start pushing, even though I was having a massive urge to push. They didn't want me to start pushing until they knew for sure I was at 10 centimeters because they didn't want anything to tear. They didn't want me to break something. I don't know. They didn't want.
So annoying.
Yes.
Like they don't let you trust your own body.
Right. And so I'm literally sitting there grabbing on, because, like the hospital bed, I'm going, push, don't push, push. Because they're like, we need to check you. And the nurse is like, okay, I'm going to go get my supervisor. Like, I'm going to have her let's give it another opinion. Because I'm and so she comes in, she's like, no, I don't think you are. And I'm like, there's no, not freaking way, but in a not nice terms.
Yeah.
And she was like, you know what? I think that you just have like a flap of tissue that's blocking. I think you are there. I think you're 10 centimeters. And I'm like, oh, yeah, just let me push. Like, and so I'm pushing. And so eventually she's like, okay, do it. You're follow your body, follow your instincts. And so I'm pushing and pushed and pushed and pushed. And I'm in excruciating pain. I did not plan for a natural birth. I wanted an epidural. I did not want to be in pain, but I was in excruciating amounts of pain, and they just kept giving me lidocaine, and I couldn't remember the name of the drug, but I knew it ended with cane. So I just kept asking for candy cane and was like, where's Dr. Candy Cane? I need more candy cane. And my husband is in the corner, white face, for the whole thing, because he was just so unprepared for all the things that were happening. They kept telling him to help me count, 1, 2. And he was like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the nurse was like, no, slow down. And he's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they're like, no, slow down. 1, 2, 3, 4. So eventually the nurses just stopped asking him because he just and so he just sunk back into the corner and was like, I'm just gonna stay right here. And I don't blame him because I was screaming. I was so uncomfortable. I had somehow in the process of pushing for about an hour and a half had gotten her down further. And then someone suggested, at this point there were 8 nurses. There was a midwife in there. There were nurses in there. There was a lot of people in the room. And they were like, let's flip you. Let's see if you've worked her down. You've worked her this far. Let's see if flipping you into another position will do anything, because my epidural doesn't work, right?
Yeah,
so
may as well move around.
move around a little bit. And in the process of doing that, it just sent her immediately back up.
Did you feel that?
Yes. I mean, I felt everything, but it was, everything was so painful at that point that it was I didn't know what was what from what was her moving down to moving up. I was getting dosed with the lidocaine. So at a certain point, they gave me so much that I just couldn't feel anything. And a midwife was literally just both hands trying to pull my daughter out of me at one point, just trying to grab her and pull her out. And after, I think it was 3 hours of pushing, my doctor came in and was like, Kel, it's not happening. She doesn't want to come out. She is on your spine. She hasn't moved. When she went back up, she was just I'm comfortable here. At some point during all of that, I had gotten an infection. So they could tell I was spiking fevers throughout the pushing, and her heart rate was going down and up, and mine was going down and up, and a lot of things were kind of culminating into the moment that she got in. I mean, she was like, I'll do one last push with you. And at that point I was like, I've been pushing for 3 hours. it's not going to happen. I can't physically do this anymore. And I like looked at my husband and I was just like, we have to. I can't do it. I'm in so much pain. I'm so exhausted. I can't even like, I was so out of it. Like the last like 30 minutes, I don't even think the last hour, actually, I don't even think I ever opened my eyes. The last 30 minutes for sure, I was like sleeping because I was so exhausted. I was in so much pain. My body just completely shut down between the fevers and the like losing heart rates and all the things that were happening. I was just like, okay, yeah, do whatever it takes for me to like end this misery.
Yeah.
And so from there, there was like, boom, 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 done. In all of a sudden, I'm like in the bright white lights. I'm in the surgical room. I'm in the OR, like within 10 minutes of me making that decision. We were in there and we were started. And it was the first time that I really was like, okay, like I can like kind of come to, I'm like still cussing the anesthesiologist out because I'm like, that was horrible. If you make me feel this, you're dead to me. I was like, you better make sure I don't feel a thing. And like my doctor's going like, I'm pinching you, like you would feel this if you could feel something. And I'm like, I swear, I'm like still cussing him out behind me. So, I'm not gonna feel a thing. And then next thing I know, well, I think they had like changed shifts at this point, so I don't even know if it was the same person, but like I was making it known that I better not feel a thing. And then as they started to pull her out, I could feel that. It wasn't painful, but I could feel them pulling her out of me and the pressure of all of that. And I was like, traumatized. Obviously, I was like, I'm starting to feel something. I was like, thought it was going to be the pain that I had just endured. And they were like, she's out, like, happy birthday, Stella. And I was like, your birthday, Stella. And like, oh God, I was just like, I like couldn't even believe it was over. But that's just like a little bit of it, right? Like that's just the start. Because then you give birth to the baby and you have to like, then you lay there and they like tried to be really quick because I had the infection. So they wanted to close me up quickly. They wanted to get me on antibiotics. They wanted to get her on antibiotics because she could have the infection. She was not breathing when she first came out. And so they were like trying to help her doing the assisted stuff. Her APGAR score was like kind of low. So they were like, okay, we're going to take her to the NICU. They brought her over to me and like so many things before that moment. I was so nervous. I was like, she has to go on me immediately. I need to do the skin to skin. I need to have that. But they were like, she can't. We have to take her. We have to take her away. And I was like, can I at least like hold her? I need to see her face. She's like screaming bloody murder. So I'm like, okay, well, I know she's breathing now. So like, can I at least just hold her for a minute? So so Jacob goes over there and does all like, does the umbilical cord and has all that moment with her and gets her little footprint on his arm and gets her, her weight and all her vitals and stuff. And I'm really, really thankful that like he got to, have that experience. And it was just him and her and the nurse over there. And he like really got to kind of take it all in while that was happening, while I was getting stitched up. And so then they're like, yeah, we'll bring her over. And the whole time she's like screaming bloody murder. And they set her on my chest and she just goes silent.
Oh, I love that.
And she was the most alert newborn I've ever seen in my life. Like eyes wide open, staring at me, didn't make a sound, just like listened to my voice as I was like talking to her. this is the most clarity I have had in like 24 hours. I went in at 9 a.m. the night before. This was 4 a.m. the next morning that all of this was happening. And she was born at like 3:52. So just silence. It was like nothing anybody could say, nothing anybody could do to like take away that moment. It was so special. And Jacob like had the camera out. So we have pictures of just bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like newborn, just sitting there, just listening to me talk to her. And it was just magic. Like, and I knew that they were about to take her away, but like in that moment, I was like, she knows I'm her mom and I know she's my baby. And like, it was so special. So going through all of that to have that moment was just the nicest little cherry on top to the really weird cupcake that I had just eaten. And so that was nice. But they took her to the NICU. She ended up being there for about 48 hours. And the whole time, like, I didn't get to see her until late. So 4 a.m. until late that evening. So I wasn't with her for that whole time. And I know a lot of NICU moms and the NICU families that experience that. And you know the heartbreak of just like not being able to feel like you can be there for your child. Mm-hmm. But I was pretty thankful for that. Only because I was like passed out the whole time. I was so sick from the spinal that they give you for the C-section. It had made me so sick. I was puking all day. I was passed out all day. Couldn't stay awake for more than like 5 minutes at a time. It was just so hard. And so like knowing that she was at least somewhere safe, because I didn't feel safe. Mm-hmm. And that was another super scary experience to like feel like I can't even hold my baby without worrying I was going to fall asleep and like drop her or something was going to happen. So having her be there, although it was like impossible and super difficult, I at least knew that she was, safe. She was being taken care of. They were feeding her a ton of milk and to the point where she ended up like, I couldn't get her to latch when I finally did get her back. Because I was like, I'm going to try breastfeeding. I really want to try this. And she was like, I've just been getting like gallons of milk there from a nipple that just lets it out pretty easily. And I've had zero effort to being just drowned in all of the milk that I would like. So this is not for me. And I was like, oh no, like, man, I really tried. But the whole time, my infection was still around. They gave me my antibiotics that first day, but the medication that I was taking for the C-section, so like the oxycodone, Percocet, I think maybe was what it was, Percocet and Motrin were masking my infection symptoms. And so the nurses at the time, I guess, just like blamed when I had to be 4 hours, 6 hours on the dot. If I was like even 10 minutes late, I was like going through convulsions and like massive amounts of like the shakes, and everybody was just saying, oh, that's hormonal, like, which it can be. I was freezing cold, would go through and start like just all these weird, crazy things. And massive amounts of pain. I mean, like massive amounts of pain for days. It never got better. I was still having, like, looking back on it now, having my second child, I was still telling them for 4 days after my C-section, I was still at like levels 8, 9, and 10 levels of pain. because they ask you on a scale of 0 to 10, like 1 to 10, what level of pain. That whole time I was giving them 8, 9, 10s. And but the medication was helping, and it was masking all the other infection symptoms. So like just nobody picked up on it, I guess. Like,
were they doing blood work still?
Yeah, I think so, but not. But now that I think about it, like I don't think they did. I think that was one of the complaints that we had afterwards, was like they did the blood work at the beginning, but then they never really did it afterwards. Because whatever reason, honestly, like truly deeply, I do not blame those nurses, because what I really think it was is like, we're fresh, kind of like we're still in COVID, but we're kind of coming out of it. It's been a heck of a year for nurses. A lot of them left the profession. I think they were just massively understaffed, and there was no one to take care of me. Mm-hmm. There was no one there to support me. Mm-hmm. And through no fault of their own, they had too many patients, and they were just doing the best they could. Mm-hmm. And truly, that's what I feel that it was. But like, because of that, all my stuff that was entirely preventable, like just went completely missed. Mm-hmm. And was not taken care of. And nobody, like was paying attention to that.
Were you like up and walking at any point?
I was. And this is like also my thing. Like, they just tell you that, right? Like, just get up and walk around. Like, that'll help. Yeah. And so I was trying, like really was trying, and it just was never getting any better. Yeah. But like, it's my first kid. I don't know what to expect. Yeah. I just had major abdominal surgery, C-section, that I did no research about. I had no expectations. I had no idea what that was going to be like. And so I just didn't know. I didn't know what was normal. I didn't know that wasn't normal to be in that level of pain, because I also I've never really had any major surgery before. I've never really been sick. I've never had any of that to even have a gauge from a separate thing. So like, I just had no idea. And it wasn't until so we got discharged after 5 days, and I still, at that point, after 5 days, still had to be like 100% on. I tried to wean off a little bit of the Percocet, and I had to immediately, I was like, oh, absolutely not. Like, and then I was nervous, like, am I going to get addicted to this? Is this normal? Like, if I'm not taking it, I'm in this level of pain. Well, then I'm definitely going to get addicted to it, because that level of pain is insane, and this helps it massively. So like, if that's what that is, then I can completely see how people get addicted to these opioids. And then when their prescription is cut off, then they have to find other methods. And I was like, all this stuff is going through my head, because I'm just, it hurt. It hurts so bad. And the first night that we go home, I look at my husband and I say, I'm like holding her. I'm like still trying to breastfeed at this point. I'm like, we're still, giving it the old college try. And it's just not working. And I am a little bit off on my medication. And I start having these like the sweats, and I'm starting getting the chills, and I'm starting to pass out again. And I'm like, you have to hold the baby. And of course, like, this is all a stressful time for him too. So he's like, what do you mean you can't take care of the baby? Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, we have our dog back now. We have like the baby, this newborn baby. Like, he had never held a baby before for more than maybe, like, he was an uncle, but like, he holds the baby really awkwardly for like a couple minutes, and then like gives it back, He was like, this is not for me. And so like, that was the extent of him holding a baby before that point. Yeah. And he was like, all very overwhelming. He's like, you're passing out. Like, you're going to bed right now. And I'm like, I can't help it. I have to go lay down. I have to get under the covers. I'm freezing cold. And I was like, well, last time this happened, like I just needed to take my medicine. That's all I needed to do. And then it will go away. And so I passed out for like an hour and a half. And then when the medicine kicked back in, then I was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I called my sister, my older sister, who has had 4 kids at this point. And I'm like, did this happen at any point? And she was like, no, I don't know. It's like she had a vaginal birth for all 4 kids. So like, she just was like, I have no idea. Like, I don't know about the C-section. I don't know if that's normal. And it sounds kind of crazy, but like, and she was like texting her friends, like, did you have this happen? Like, maybe when your milk comes in, you can get fevers. And so like, maybe that's it. I was like, I don't know. So she came over to help. She just watched Stella while I was like going through all this. And she was like, maybe you just need some rest. Like, go take a nap. So like me and my husband, we went and took a nap, and she just like watched Stella sleep for an hour, which is really nice. And so I was like, okay, well, I just need to be better about taking my medication. The next night, my dad and my stepmom come over to meet Stella for the first time, because this was at the hospital. We couldn't have any visitors at the time. COVID. And so they came to meet her, and of course I'm like spending time with them and explaining all, like, this is just what I went through. It's crazy. And I'm not paying attention to the time, and I'm like 15 minutes off from they leave. I'm like 15 minutes off my medication, and it starts happening again. And I'm like, I like start getting the shakes, and I start getting really cold, and I was like, okay, I need to like take my temperature this time. I really need to take my temperature, because yesterday I didn't take it until I had already taken the medication. And so I was like, so go find the thermometer, and Jacob takes it, and I pass out, and he takes it, and it's like 103. And so I call the doctor, and they were like, you need to come in. You need to come into the hospital. And I'm like, but I have a baby, and I have a husband, and I have a dog. We only have one car. Is he supposed to get the baby ready and do all this stuff? Like, and they were like, you need to come now. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm calling an ambulance. And I was like, I know this is going to be super expensive, but like, I've already had all the medical bills, like, fine, whatever. Like, hopefully I'll just reach my deductible and whatever. Like, I just need to get to the hospital. And so so I called the ambulance, and they came, and I couldn't get out of bed because I didn't want to take my medication, because I was like, I need somebody to tell me what's wrong. Yeah. Something is wrong. And if I take it, I'm afraid it's going to mask whatever is actually happening. Yeah. And so I was like, so I'm not taking it. So I'm literally like passing out constantly, like in my bed. Poor husband's like just standing there, like has no idea what to do, just holding our newborn daughter. It's been 24 hours since we've been discharged. It hasn't even been 24 hours since I was discharged. And they like get me up. The paramedics like get me up, and they take me out, and they were like walking me through the house, because my house is so small they can't even like bring in anything to get me out of the house. So they're like kind of carrying me. I'm kind of walking, and they get me on the stretcher, and they like wheel me out of my house. And I just like look back, and my husband is just like standing in the doorway as I'm being wheeled out on a stretcher and put into an ambulance with our 5-day-old daughter in his arms and our dog. And he's just like, and like that image will forever be burned into my memory, into my brain, because that was terrifying.
Tune in next week for part 2 of Kelly's birth story.
2 days go by, and I still have the infection. It has spread from my uterus to my C-section scar. So it's getting worse. I'm I'm trying to breastfeed. Every 3 hours I'm
Yeah,
pumping. I was also experiencing this profound like realization of like, where's my community? 6 months later, we were like, wait, should we try it?
I just like accidentally got pregnant.
Oh no, we did it on purpose.
Oh.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Golden Hour Birth Podcast. Check out Kelly's Instagram at traveling.with.babies. We'll link her socials and her blog in the show notes. Tune in next week for part 2. And if you enjoyed this week's episode, please share it with a friend and give us a 5-star rating and review. See you next episode.